Okay. Good morning. I'm Dr. Murray Bissett, Vice President of Education for Common Sense Society. Happy that you're all here, and I would like you to please join me in welcoming founder, president, and CEO of Common Sense Society, Mr. Marion Smith.
Well, thank you, Murray, and good morning to all of you. Given the weather outside, I think it's a good day to be indoors, and we've got a wonderful program for you today. Just a bit about Common Sense Society. We are just one little platoon committed to keeping our republic, saving civilization, and leaving it better than we found it. We promote liberty, prosperity, and beauty, a culture that fosters human happiness. And in the conference portion of today's events, we're going to have a panel first addressing the future of American education. Many of us share concerns that education in this country has focused too little on the essentials and too much on ideology. And you're going to hear from individuals who are on the front lines of fixing that problem. Our second panel will deal with woke capitalism. There again, major institution of the United States and our free society, free enterprise, corporations, and that they too maybe have become too little focused on the fundamentals of business and competition, voluntary exchange, and perhaps too ideological as well. And so we'll explore that topic in ways that we can fix that problem. And then finally, following a short lunch, we're going to enjoy a conversation with Dr. Jordan Peterson, and that will be moderated by Ignat Solzhenitsyn, a conductor, author, and son of the well-known Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And then I hope to see many of you this evening for our gala dinner, where we will award Dr. Jordan Peterson the inaugural Sir Roger Scruton Prize. We will also award our Common Sense Courage Award to Rosa Maria Paya, a champion human rights fighter in Cuba and daughter of the late slain Oswaldo Paya. Lastly, let me just thank all of our sponsors, but in particular Mr. Thomas Peterfy and Ms. Lynn Wheat, Alex and Kathy Cranberg, and Thomas W. and Diane Smith for their support, and for all of our sponsors making this happen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the chair of our first panel and Common Sense Society's newest senior fellow, Dr. Jon Peede, who is also the longest-serving chairman of the National Endowment for Humanities. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be here with the Common Sense Society and with this panel. I will make a one or two sentence introduction of our three panelists. They will make remarks. You have a more extensive biographical statement on each of them in the program. After they make their brief remarks, I will ask a few questions and we will turn it over to the audience and to hear from you. And since I am a Mississippian and you never want one of us to speak ad hoc, I have written my remarks to try to allow time for others. But it is a pleasure to be here. We will start first with Dr. Kanelos, and he is, of course, a founding trustee and president of the University of Austin, which was launched in November of last year. I think you know very much about this. And of course, he was also the 24th president of St. John's College in Annapolis. Pano.
Thank you, John. I have also scripted my remarks because I'm Greek, and if I didn't actually write things down, Greeks argue a lot. I'd start arguing with myself on stage, so keep things clear. So I have just a few remarks about how I see the state of higher education today and what is inspiring us to undertake this project to start a new university, which is a totally insane thing to do. I'm just going to say that right now. What we think of as higher education in the West is rooted in a fundamentally Greek understanding of human nature. Since Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum, we have created institutions that are set slightly askew from the city, the purpose of which is to look critically upon the world, society, and the individual. Those who inhabit these institutions, whether we think of them as philosophers or scholars, are tasked with asking questions and seeking answers. Some of the questions, those that have qualities we can measure, are quantitative. Others, those for which we try to judge what is better or worse, are qualitative. Roughly speaking, these two strands give us the sciences and the humanities. These two ways of knowing the world form the artes liberales, the arts through which a human being might seek freedom. Higher education is predicated upon the belief that man is rational, a creature capable of exercising ratiocinative powers in an analytical and critical fashion. But the Greeks knew well that man is not an exclusively rational creature, that he is rather a pied being composed of complex, competing elements. Plato's image was that of reason as a charioteer, flying across the sky, being pulled by two wild horses, one representing thumos, our desire for glory, pulling us heavenward, the other representing the material passions, trying to drive the chariot into the earth. To know the world as best we can, we must persistently scrutinize ourselves as knowers, coming to better understand how our desires and passions pull at our reason, dragging us from our steady course. Thus, anything that inhibits self-reflection is inimical to the purpose of the university, which is the pursuit of truth. Yet we now live in the age of I, an era of atomic individualism. We have moved from being seekers of meaning to makers of meaning. Narratives buffet one against the other in an endless struggle for domination. The role of universities in this account is to ruin the sacred truths, smash orthodoxies, so as to liberate the individual to pursue a sort of nebulous self-fulfillment. Yet that is only one end of the spectrum. On the opposite pole, we find in this age something akin to divine revelation. To an enlightened few, a totalizing narrative has been unveiled. History is a sequence of injustices. The purpose of human striving is to ensure that the past is not the future. The end point of history is a state of universal equity. The function of universities is to quicken this process. So on one extreme, we find that there is nothing that can be known, that everything is relative to the protean individual. The will to power is celebrated, and the end of humanity is to transcend any and all limitations. And at the other extreme, we have unveiled the cultic meaning of history. The exercise of power is always accompanied by domination and submission, and is thus innately immoral. The highest pursuit is the singular pursuit of justice. Because we inhabit an exclusively flat, immanent, and material universe, justice is defined as the leveling of all hierarchies in the quest for universal material well-being. The first premise, the valorization of desire, leads to chaos and nihilism. the second premise leads to totalitarianism. Yet the modern university is committed to both these positions, even though they are contradictory and oppositional. On the one hand, we find the untethered will, and on the other, the individual will melts into the undifferentiated collective. This schizophrenia underlies most of the pathologies we find in higher education today. If we are to renew the purpose and promise of universities, we must navigate the Scylla of relativism and the Charybdis of ideology. We must create institutions where those seeking answers to the most important questions begin from a position of intellectual humility and are animated by the pursuit of truth. We must foster communities of conversation where ideas and opinions can be brought forth without fear, so that all interlocutors can engage freely in the highest purpose of education, which is to better understand oneself, even as one comes to better understand the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Adam Kissel. He is a senior fellow at the Cardinal Institute of West Virginia Policy and the chairman of the West Virginia Professional Charter School Board. Prior to this, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Higher Education Programs in the Office of Post-Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. Adam?
Good morning, everyone. Happy National School Choice Week here in the United States. Thank you. Maybe I don't need to explain how education freedom is good. The vision is that every kid ends up with education that is best suited to that child. It's not a hard concept. And West Virginia, in the year 2021, became the leader in school choice. So I want to tell you a little bit about that. But first, I want to talk about a little of why 2021 was such a banner year. Some people call it the year of education freedom or the year of school choice. My argument will be that we're not just looking backwards, but this is a biennium of school choice. And maybe we'll be talking next year about a triennium of school choice or the quadrennium of school choice. And I'll give some reasons for why I think we're in that mode here in the United States. In 2020, about 600,000 students were taking advantage of school choice options, in addition to all the students who were homeschooled, which was about 5.4% of all students in the United States. In 2021, that number rose by a factor of 4, with an additional 1.6 million students being able to have school choice. There were 18 states in the United States that expanded programs for school choice or which created new ones. And that was more than 18 programs. For instance, in West Virginia, we started a new education savings account program and expanded charter schools. We were a generation behind in charter schools. We still don't have any. There's a lawsuit, and there may be 5 that start this fall. But we're the leader in West Virginia in school choice in the area of education savings accounts. An education savings account is better than a voucher. Here in Florida, we have vouchers, and you get $6,000 and some per student per year to go to a private school, for instance. But an education savings account is an account for any educational expense, whether you choose private school, if you want to take music lessons, homeschool, whatever it is that you have an educational expense for, you can do that. And unlike other ESA programs elsewhere in the country, which are not taken up by all that many students because they're very closely restricted, in West Virginia, any public school student can leave the system and get $4,500 per year for any educational expense. It's a fantastic program. Other states are starting to think how they can copy West Virginia, which is good because West Virginia has a long way to go in student achievement. We're somewhere around 45 out of 50. The public system has had 100 years to figure out how to educate our students education is not that easy, granted, but after 100 years, what do they have to show for it? Not all that much. School choice is valuable, not just because every student is unique and needs the experience that's best for that student, but also because introducing competition into the marketplace improves schools that are the traditional schools, in addition to inspiring them to innovate, which they otherwise would not have done. They probably still don't. But at least there's an opportunity for competition to drive innovation, to drive better outcomes for students, both in the traditional public system and in the newer schools. So Corey DeAngelis at American Federation for Children, he's predicted just recently that we'll have another great year in 2022, but I see this wave continuing. It's not only on the positive side that choice leads to competition, to innovation, the new options get better, but there's, I think, some reasons that we're seeing in the culture about parents in particular that show us that parents are going to keep advocating for the education that's best for their children, and they see what's wrong in a new way because of the pandemic era with lots of students at home and parents looking over their shoulders, seeing what's really taught in the public school. Parents are seeing something needs to change. So there are a number of parent organizations now that have sprung up with thousands and thousands of members. They've learned how to file FOIA requests to get transparency in the traditional schools. They, in fact, have doubled the number of homeschoolings. So now there's 11.1% of all students in the United States are homeschooled, apparently. 11%, that's an amazing number. And here in Florida, 50% of students are not in the traditional zoned public school that they would normally be assigned to. Half of all students in Florida. Something has changed in a dramatic way in the United States, especially in the past year. So why do I think that's happening and will keep happening? It's not only because parents want their children to have a good education, and I'll give a quick example of Pericles in a couple minutes. But for one thing, we'll see in the next panel, woke capitalism. So if you, as the parent, are seeing that your workplace has become wokeified, then you say, what's happening in the schools? What's causing all of those people to get out of high school and then college with those views? Maybe I need to worry about my kids and what they're getting along the way. High school, grade school, kindergarten. We see even some news reports of pre-K infected with woke ideology. I think donors will continue to be fueling the fire on both sides. Politicians will continue to fuel the fire on both sides. And there will always be an outrage somewhere. So some school board might call it, say, fix itself, but another school board somewhere else will do something crazy and it will always be in the news. So I think between the pandemic era, money in the system, parents caring about their kids, and lots of attention to these issues, we are going to have let's just call it an era of school choice. We'll go past the quadrennium. There will be more and more school choice in the United States. I do want to have a footnote on Pericles. So in Plato's Meno, you may know, maybe we weren't quite in that course, we were in graduate school together. The question comes up, can virtue be taught? Well, if virtue could be taught, you would see that the most virtuous people like Pericles, the person who created democracy for Athens, I'll say that, or built democracy, he would train up his own kids in virtue, wouldn't he? Because if he wants his children to be virtuous and he's virtuous, he's going to get them the best teachers. Well, then look at his kids. They didn't turn out so well. So maybe you can't teach virtue. So it actually is a challenge. What do you do to someone to get them that spark of inspiration to say, you know what, I want to be a good person. I want to grow up to be a good citizen. That's more challenging than you think. And I really appreciated the previous speaker's comments talking about the broad goals for higher ed, but since most people don't go to college, how do you get that to happen by the time somebody is 18? Or do you have to make them a lifelong learner in some way where they get that spark of learning? And what we had in graduate school, and what a lot of folks in the audience, I think, do, is think about classical learning and the great conversation, the great ideas that inspire us to say, well, what is the better life? What is the kind of life that I want? And if you do that well, that's not what you get in the traditional schools, but it is what you could get in a classical school or in some of the new charter schools that are springing up. So I do want to leave you with that hard question about if virtue really can be taught, how do you do it?
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Our next panelist will be Dr. David C. Rose. He is a professor of economics at the University of Missouri St. Louis and is a senior fellow at Common Sense Society. Dave?
Thanks, John. Today I'd like to talk about what I think needs to happen in American education to give America its best chance to even have a future. I'd like to talk about civic education in particular, specifically the American Civics Project. The progressives have eliminated much of American civic education. They've deprecated much of what remains. And they've introduced a connecting narrative that tears down rather than builds up the kinds of citizens needed to sustain our free market democracy and constitutional republic. We're now living with the mounting consequences of their success. So the question is there anything that can be done about this? Simply resurrecting the civic education of our parents and grandparents won't work. It actually failed. And it failed at a time when cultural inertia was much more on our side. I submit that we need a new kind of civic education, one that makes the moral case for our way of life by explaining why our free market democracy is basically a highly evolved system of cooperation made sustainable by our constitutional republic. Now, the essence of cooperation is as simple as it is powerful. Alone I make 10, alone you make 10, but working together, cooperating, we make 26. Our brains naturally expected it would be 20, but it's not, it's 26. Those extra 6 units are what makes it possible to have enough to go around for both of us, so we freely choose it. Cooperation does not require coercion and does not work well under coercion. It's the antithesis of them. However, at the same time, that 6 units is also what makes it possible to increase the amount of output per person, which of course is the first step to increasing general prosperity. Now, what about literature? What about history? What about the arts? What about science? What about rights regarding freedom, contracts, property, and even the rule of law? What about the mechanisms of government, the genius of enumerating and separating government power? All of these things are incredibly important and must be included in any revival of civic education. But even all of these things, if done perfectly, done better than ever done before, is still not enough. Why? Well, people are most likely to retain a body of knowledge with conviction if they can see how all the pieces of that body of knowledge are tied together by some big idea. The civic education of our parents and grandparents failed because it lacked such a big idea. Now, I think that the progressives have been so successful because they have such a big idea. So what is their big idea? Well, it's just the claim that the rise of the West and America is largely the story of ever-increasing oppression of the weak by the strong. And in their latest wrinkle, they stress that the power needed to effectuate this outcome is so deftly embedded in all of our institutions that we're largely unaware of it. Very convenient little position for them, I would say. Any honest reading of history leads one to conclude that this is mostly nonsense. But it resonates with our tribal genes, and it taps into our disgust for injustice. So it works, especially with young people. Now, we can keep trying to fix that boat, or we can build a brand new one with our own big idea, a big idea that just so happens to be correct. It's the claim that the rise of the West and America is largely the story of ever more effective cooperation, catalyzed by an ever better market system filled with ever freer citizens. Jonathan Haidt calls cooperation the most powerful force known on the planet, and he is right. Ideas don't get bigger or more important than cooperation. Cooperation provides an elegant, attractive, unifying concept that ties all the pieces together, producing what could be called a beautiful Scrutonian elegance that impresses the mind in a deep way. The progressive thread emphasizes oppression, thereby dividing us into winners and losers, sowing the seeds of suspicion with our fellow citizens. Our thread stresses cooperation, the common cause, which sows the seeds of faith in our fellow citizens. Now, is this not what so many Americans now hunger for? Is this not what our country needs now more than ever before? Our story begins with the very simple forms of cooperation taken out of prehistory. Things get increasingly interesting as cooperation becomes increasingly catalyzed by the coevolution of voluntary exchange over ever more sophisticated and complex markets. At the Common Sense Society, we will lay this story out along the timeline of history. What happened first is what's taught first, which matches the easiest content with the youngest minds. Institutions are introduced only as they emerge in the timeline. This will make civic education come alive by couching it in a grand story of the rise of human cooperation over human conflict. Our curriculum will run all the way from K through 12, but we'll have a compressed version that can be taught solely at the high school level. There'll be content that pertains to Western civilization generally, then content for America, and then another layer of content that pertains to each of the 50 states and a select few foreign countries. Our goal is to provide a curriculum that is so exciting and so well rooted in sheer common sense that parents will demand that it be adopted. The American Civics Project will not double down on approaches that have already failed. It's new, it's different, it's fundamental. It teaches children the miracle, and indeed it is a miracle, of cooperation so early in their development that when they first learn of progressivism, they will see it as sophistry, whose aim is to pave the way for ruling us by pitting us against each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. We'll make a few biographical statements and then lead into our first question, which I'll hope that each panelist will answer. After I concluded my service as NEH chairman, bringing to the end 12 years of service at the NEH and NEA dating back to the Bush administration, I made two career decisions last year. One, I proudly joined the English faculty at Mississippi Valley State University, which is a historically black college in Mississippi, in a place in the Mississippi Delta where so much of American music and the civil rights movement came together. And I chose the university, and it chose me, I believe, because of the dedication to educational affordability and to the value of the liberal arts. Second, and more recently, I became a Common Sense Senior Fellow because of his commitment to free speech, free people, and free markets, and because of its uncommon commitment to aesthetic beauty as a moral good. And to flip a phrase from Shakespeare, I have come to praise beauty and the humanities, not to bury it. And I must say that when I look at the 20th century, I believe the conservative intellectuals made an unconscious but damaging decision in the second half of the 20th century to narrow our interest in the humanities to largely the field of jurisprudence, political science, government, civics, economics, and occasionally history and philosophy within a restricted range. Even Russell Kirk could not arrest this reorientation of appetite. Western art, Western literature, music, dance, religion, religious studies, languages ancient and modern were largely abandoned and thus the creative class and the transcendent arts were abandoned as well. If an American university driven by its liberal arts mission is rare a generation from now, I fear that there will be two causes. One, conservative intellectuals have failed to save the teaching of Western civilization because they withdrew from or allowed themselves to be run off from the departments of art, classical studies, English, philosophy, etc. And the institutional leaders and funders will not intervene to preserve what conservatives no longer value. And two, progressive academics will have lacked the necessary authority and respect beyond the campus to advocate successfully for the liberal arts, because what began as Marxist rhetoric devolved into educational policy, and the general public has a substantial distaste for ideologies targeting shared heritage for removal. So I ask each of you, can the humanities be saved? And to be clear, when I say the humanities, that in Western civilization, that's Frederick Douglass as much as it's George Washington. So can the humanities be saved, and if so, how?
Well, I guess I'll start. You had me at Shakespeare, which I'll tell you your version of it. Can the humanities be saved? That assumes that they're lost, and I'm not sure that that's the case. I mean, I think, like Dostoevsky said, that beauty will save the world. We live in a world that is desperate to be saved. And so we are turning, I think, instinctively towards this set of disciplines that we think of as the humanities to find something that we're missing. Universities have increasingly turned in the other direction. You know, if the purpose of a university is job placement, we shouldn't have universities. There's a much more efficient way to put young people in jobs than to make them go through 4 years of coursework and getting into debt to have their sort of starting job. The purpose of the university is additive. That is, as young people are reaching their maturity, we have an opportunity to turn them into critical thinkers, those who understand the world in a complex way, and those who are prepared to spend the rest of their lives seeking after this thing called human flourishing. You can't do that without the humanities. Life is not simply a quantitative exercise, it's a qualitative exercise. So I think, John, I think institutionally, education, and particularly higher education, is moving away from the humanities, but I think as human beings, we're not going to let it get that far off course. I mean, we're really, this is why we turn to this thing called higher education, to find the things that are actually highest in our human experience.
Thank you.
We have an international audience, so let me say something about primary and secondary enculturation, culture by culture. One of my mentors at University of Chicago, Donald Levine, in a book called Powers of the Mind, The Reinvention of Liberal Learning in America, starts with this idea that every culture does something to its young people to enculturate them in the ways and the folk ways of that society and civilization. You're being created to reproduce what's already there. And then there's a secondary enculturation, which does some of the higher things. It's more for an elite. It forms the statesman. It forms the leader. It forms you to say, well, maybe the ways we do things aren't the ways they should always be for me or for society. And that secondary enculturation often can open you up to a different way of being that's beyond just going through the motions that everyone else in your society goes through. And I think there's something smart about that, and there's something about the humanities that offers that. So as we're getting young people into adulthood, I think, especially around 11th and 12th grade in the United States, they're being introduced to poems in a more real way. They're being introduced to literature, and they actually still read Shakespeare, I think, even in the public schools, at least I hope. And they say, wow, there is something here for me. And then higher education drums it out of them so often, as the first comment, second comment said. So I think there's a lot of hope so long as that spark that's caught in the younger years before you get to college is able to be maintained for the students who really say, you know what, there is something higher for me.
If you look at the long sweep of history, it's undeniable that for the first 99.99999% of the genus Homo, we lived in very, very small groups. And we continue to live in small groups until extremely recently. And why is that important? Well, it's important because we are fundamentally a small group species. We have small group moral intuitions. Our brains work in a kind of small group way. We trust each other and cooperate with each other very easily in very small group contexts. The genius of the rise of the West and all the benefits that we have now because of it is really a long story of how we were able to create new ideas that could stretch our ability to live with each other in ever larger groups within which we could effectuate the amazing gains from specialization that was spoken by Adam Smith and others. So stretching the size of our groups by suppressing our pretty hardwired penchant for tribalism has been the secret of our success. That's the name of the game. It took a very, very long time. It took tremendous hard work from some of the most extraordinary humans to ever be on the planet. And so the problem is now when you look at the humanities that we have that's required in order to sustain the kind of ideas that sustain a thriving free market democracy and constitutional republic, these ideas are the product of such a long chain of evolution and scholarship that they're actually pretty subtle, pretty complex, and pretty difficult. So is there a future for the humanities? Well, one thing that the left has done a very good job of is reducing our ability to cultivate the kind of intellectual discipline that's required to read long, complicated, difficult texts at an early age. Because if you miss this opportunity to cultivate that type of thinking, it's very difficult to get it back later. You really just don't. Well, then what that means is you have generation after generation of people who simply can't grasp some of the most important things ever written by anyone ever and upon which our society is based. So we have a kind of a nuts and bolts practical problem to solve at the front end in order to even have a chance at addressing the issue of whether we can resuscitate the humanities now.
Thank you, and I think we're coming to audience questions very soon. We'll let the gentleman here ask the question. And please, as they say, make the question a question rather than a statement. All right, while he's locating, you want people to raise their hand if they wish? All right, while you raise your hands, I'll ask another question, and it need not be everyone responding. At every Ivy League institution, at our leading liberal arts colleges, our elite R1 research universities, the battle is really no longer between liberals and conservatives. It's really between liberals and progressives, and the latter group is winning, frankly, in a rout. That means that on a lot of campuses, there's vocal opposition to viewpoint diversity, to the tradition of dissent, freedom of speech, and other foundational educational values. So how does this paradigm shift affect current and future students, and what does it mean for our society at large?
There's a number of studies just in the past few years asking students about the campus culture. Do they feel comfortable saying something outside of the status quo? More and more students are saying they're afraid to speak up, and that obviously carries up into the workplace and the rest of society. There's, of course, the psychological sense that we all have that we want to be liked by not just our friends, but everyone around us, which plays into it. But what college is supposed to do is to get you thinking for yourself and saying maybe something's different. That's not happening very much. And when you ask students, would it even be acceptable to commit violence against a speaker who's saying something I don't like, more and more students are saying yes, it would be. So we're in a very dangerous time in our college campuses.
Thank you. if we have, we'll take a question from the audience. I'll ask one, we'll go back to audience. Sir?
Okay, great. So this could be for anyone on the panel, but I'm just wondering what lessons you think we could learn by looking at the places where liberal arts is actually being done well right now. St. Jerome Institute in Washington, D.C., Trinity at Meadowbrook, which is ecumenical, University of Dallas, which is a college. Every single one of them is Christian, not just Catholic, but generally Orthodox Christian and religious. That's where it's happening, and maybe it's happening a couple of other places, but I guess my intuition is that this may not be a coincidence, and what does that mean for reviving liberal arts in a more secular setting? I was going to ask a tough question, so there you go.
I'll take a stab at that. So I was president of St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, which is not a faith-based institution in spite of its name. It's never been. Third oldest college in the U.S., a long tradition of adhering to a liberal arts curriculum. St. John's is one of the most politically ecumenical institutions in our country. The students, the faculty gather around tables, they read important books, they discuss great ideas, and what allows the conversations to happen is what I think of as a kind of triangulation. Rather than talking about what we each think about what's on our mind today, we have to confront the ideas that have consistently been important to human beings across time. And so I think what a liberal arts education offers is the ability to transcend our kind of quotidian experience, to look at big questions from a higher vantage point. And what that does, ultimately, is remind us that we're all human. I mean, when we talk about the humanities, the whole purpose of the humanities is to interrogate our humanity. And so how do we do that? We have to have, we have to be prompted by books, by art, by the underlying principles of science, by mathematics, to think about things that are greater than we are. So I think that's the fundamental freedom that you experience from a liberal arts education, the freedom from being ourselves in the iron cage of the moment we live in. So an institution that allows that kind of transcendence is fulfilling the purpose of higher education.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one follow-up question, then we're going to go to the audience. Pana, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the University of Austin. So if you follow this, you know, the media, particularly higher education media, there was a great deal of criticism. But if you look at the response from potential students, faculty, and donors, of course, there's a warm reception. Tell us about the promise and perils of the university, and kind of respond to those who say, well, is it going to just be ideological in a different direction? You know, so
yeah. Look, it would be a grave error to create an institution in response to the political and ideological asymmetry we see in higher education today, to create an institution that is simply weighted at the other end. The problem with higher education today is its sort of narrowness of perspective. So to try and create an institution that's conservative or right-wing or however you want to characterize it is not a solution. It's an accelerant to the problems that we have today. An institution that's truly dedicated to higher things is an institution that has to be as open as possible to all ideas and to be committed to the fearless pursuit of truth. You know, this is somewhat threatening to the system that we have in higher education today. You know, in some sense, what we're saying is the emperor has no clothes. That higher education has fundamentally lost its way. And so when you propose an institution that tries to course correct, there is a degree of blowback. But, you know, we welcome that. It's, you know, as a mentor of mine said to me, you can't be consequential without being controversial. And so the kind of response we've received in the media and elsewhere that has been critical of our institution, to me is a sign that we are probably doing the right thing. Thankfully, most of the response has actually been really interested and positive, but yeah.
Thank you. Questions from the audience?
Thank you, gentlemen, so much. This is terrific. You've made some brilliant points about leveraging lyceums and cooperating. And I want to ask you, what are the practical tips for scaling this? So from Mississippi Valley State to University of Chicago to University of Austin, how can we make sure that K-12 and college students can unlock these ideas, have exposure, and truly experience human flourishing? What would it take to scale across institutions?
One thing that I think is important for teacher education is to get around the traditional education schools, which are producing teachers who are not saying the kinds of things we're saying on this stage. So having alternative methods of credentialing is an important way to do it. But you still have tens of thousands of teachers who went through the old way, and we'll be challenging a pretty large monster there. So having lots of post-credential education for teachers in economic education, in civic education, like some organizations already do, would be really valuable. And for instance, the Bill of Rights Institute or the Ashbrook Center or the Jack Miller Center in civics will find hundreds and thousands of teachers. In fact, here in Florida, the governor has devoted tens of millions of dollars to that kind of civic education for teachers. So if teachers are better prepared, their students will be better prepared. I'll leave higher ed to someone else, but at least at the K-12 level, there's an important role for getting around the existing system, but then doing something with the teachers who are already in the system.
I would say that one of the big problems that we have that's kind of broadly a problem, it really isn't, and this kind of picks up a little on your comments as well, is that the problem in education isn't that we have the wrong intellectualism. The problem in education is we have anti-intellectualism. I mean, it's a much deeper problem. And it is producing a condition of intellectual infantilism throughout our culture. And we now have people who are young adults that are really pretty intellectually infantile because of it. And why is that? Well, there's a certain kind of pessimism that comes from people who believe in the moral propriety of their particular vision of society. Like they've got it figured out, they know what's right. Well, then they have a plan. If they have a plan, then everything works towards that plan. Anything that could deviate from that plan is therefore dangerous. It's something to be afraid of. And so as a result, utopianism tends to breed anti-intellectualism in a very pessimistic way. We need to get to our teachers at the youngest possible ages, or of course even our students, and press upon them that the progress of our species has been something that's resulted from the flowering of intellectualism, and intellectualism is fundamentally optimistic, because intellectualism, and this is why we aren't afraid to open up the intellectual story. We believe that the best ideas are going to win as long as they get a chance to actually compete fairly. And we also, not only do we have this optimism and confidence, we also have humility. There are times when we're just wrong. After we have the conversation, we're just wrong, and that's not a problem. All you've got to do is change your position. You go right back to being right again. But to the people who run schools and colleges now, saying that is to them bizarre and unbelievable. So I think we've gotten too far away from cultivating honest intellectual pursuit. Our brains are really not gained for intellectualism. If you think about it, why did we evolve the intelligence that we had? Well, most of the things that we ever did in our more primitive state involve solving problems. When you're solving a problem, by definition, you already know where you want to go. So you're applying logic, reason, in order to solve a problem. Well, that's certainly fine, but that's not what intellectualism is. Intellectualism doesn't want to start at the end. It wants to start at the beginning and work your way to a conclusion. So it's very difficult to acculturate students into intellectualism, but it will not happen by on its own, because they are born anti-intellectual.
Thank you. I would say, and I particularly say it, to parents, to donors, let us not think so much about some artificial ranking. What I would say is the most valuable institutions of higher learning are at home and are a home in their community. The least valuable are merely housed in a place. And that might go, by the way, for think tanks and nonprofits and foundations as well. Now, I have poor vision, even with bifocals. If there's not another audience, I want to quickly turn to Adam. So, charter schools. So, the concerns of, say, teacher unions are that charter schools take away some of the most talented teachers and students, and also possibly a large part of the tax base. Charter school advocates say that they're an efficient and effective alternative to failing public schools. So help us understand that, in a real sense, how charter schools work, and not just their academic, but their vocational breadth. Oh, and do it quickly.
So in West Virginia, every charter school is a public charter school, and funding for the school is based on per pupil enrollment. So you, in theory, have the same amount of dollars per student for the students who remain in the traditional public school. So the money is not being taken away. If the student moved to Ohio, the money would still be following the student to Ohio, but different taxpayers. So the argument that you're taking money away from the traditional public schools is not really true. The per student money is not only the same, but it's larger because you don't get 100% of the money following the child. You get a smaller percentage. So I think in West Virginia it's 90%. So you're getting 110% of the money if one of your students leaves, so you're getting more money per student. On the vocational side, we have a president of a community college in South Charleston, near where I live, who said, you know what, we have a nursing shortage. Let's start a high school, public charter high school, that focuses on STEM and nursing. And I said, great, put in that application, because that's a way to innovatively solve a need for the state. And they'll have money per student. And if you want to study nursing, you'll go there. If you don't, you'll still get a regular public education. And innovations like that, I think, are what will make charter schools even more attractive.
Thank you.
This is directed to Dr. Kanelos. Earlier you mentioned that you're consciously steering away from going diametrically opposed in the model of University of Austin to the liberal progressive model that's currently in place. I was reminded of something called O'Sullivan's Law. O'Sullivan was a former editor of the National Review and a speechwriter for Margaret Thatcher. At some point, probably 40 years ago, he came with this particular law that states, paraphrased, any institution that is not explicitly conservative will over time become liberal. Is that a concern of yours?
Yeah, I've been asked this question, as you might imagine, many times. Like, what's the time frame we're looking at? When you're building a university, you're thinking about centuries, not decades. And the idea is that if you build an institution with solid foundations, that the currents of politics that we're facing today are ripples, not waves. So, I think, yes, in the past 50 years in this, in this ecosystem of American political culture, things have trended in one direction. I don't think that's written in stone. I think if you adhere to the fundamental principles that should animate any university, open inquiry, civil discourse, freedom of conscience, and you embed those principles in the foundations of an institution, that centuries from now, the institution is going to be operating in the way that you hope it will operate. So, we're looking at a long timeline here, and I give us at least 300 years before they tear down the statue of me that's going to be in the center of the campus.
We have a question here. Yes.
Thank you. We all know that money ultimately drives everything. And we're moving towards elections next year, then the next year, the 2 years out. And federal funds, as important as state are a major driving force of higher ed. So I ask, what advice would the panel give to our upcoming Congress, our next president, would be the most important changes at the federal level to redress these problems in higher ed? What can they do?
After the federal government took over student loans and caused about $2 trillion worth of student debt through the Bennett hypothesis, it seems to me that by far the best solution on the money side is to entirely privatize student loans again. There's tens of billions of dollars also coming into universities from donors, from alumni and others, and that will continue to happen. The large universities that have been here for 300 years are not ever going to go away, but it'll be harder for them to raise tuition if they're not getting below market interest rate loans for their students.
I'll say, and I'll withdraw a question I was going to ask that touches on this topic. So I'll give you the statistics. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, college tuition expenses have increased 1,200% since 1980. Consumer price index has gone up less than 250%. So it's affordability. We won't have a time to get into the University of Austin, but I think the op-ed to be written is about bending the cost curve. But until we, as educators and decision makers, until we control the cost, until we decide that every dorm has to be a palace and the amenities endless, until we stop increasing the amount of administrators versus teachers in the classroom, we're going to have a fundamental problem. A problem, by the way, that our European peers, for example, do not have, and other nations outside of Europe. Any others?
I mean, look, the tuition escalation is an important issue. It's complicated. What most people don't understand is there are too few students for the seats that are currently available in higher education. So institutions are competing for an increasingly smaller market of students. So how do you compete? You offer more bells and whistles, amenities that drive up the cost. Who bears the cost? The students. Every blade of grass that's mowed, every trip down the lazy river, every sushi roll at the university is ultimately paid for by the students. So we have to strip all that away. I mean, our commitment at University of Austin, I mean, this is kind of cheeky, but I'm like, our tuition will never be more than half of Harvard's tuition. And believe it or not, when you do the spreadsheets, it's not that difficult to provide education at that level. I mean, what do you need in education? A table, some books, and a few people sitting around it. All right, you don't need sushi. And so, so what you have to provide is a quality experience, a fundamentally transformative experience. And I think when institutions return to that as their guiding principle, the other stuff will fade away.
Thank you. You have a question here?
It's another question for Pano. Actually, Pano, this is a question that's sort of the opposite of the O'Sullivan's Law question, which is the challenge that you have is that anybody who espouses classical liberal values, free speech, academic freedom, regardless of their actual politics, is branded as a right-winger and stigmatized by a lot of their peers. And most academics are terrified of what their peers think of them because of the peer review paradigm. So in a sense, I feel like the challenge for you is the only people who are willing to brave that stigma are the ones who are generally going to lean much more right. So how do you actually attract people who think of themselves as ecumenical left of center types to a university where they know they're going to be branded as right-wingers by their peers?
So in the within a couple weeks of announcing that we were founding this university, we received over 4,000 inquiries from professors at other universities seeking jobs. Right. And those are just the ones that contacted us. So there is a minor chord running through higher education of very disaffected faculty who are not all on the right, who feel that the institution of higher education is compromised. So I'm not at all worried about attracting faculty. I'm not worried about attracting students. We've had even greater interest from students. What I'm most concerned about is just simply creating an institution that lives up to the principles that we espouse. And that's, to me, that's the greatest challenge. And to do it in a world that is pushing against those principles every single day.
Thank you. I believe we have time for us to do a last question. And I do have one, unless you're going to the audience, and just looking for cues. Okay. To bring us back to Common Sense Society, and I mentioned this quote to someone last night, so forgive me to repeat it. In a letter in around 1816, Jefferson's writing someone, and of course Jefferson always kind of knew his letters would be preserved, and he created an auto pen to make sure his copy was preserved. And he says, and I believe this is the quote, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and will never be." And so this organization is saying that we reject ignorance, that we do want to be in a state of civilization, which is to say a state of knowledge, including the understanding of beauty and how it operates in our lives. And we want to be free. And so I believe, as much as anything, that's why so many of us in this room are around this. And we do spend a lot of time in the academy about what divides us. Some of the answers have gone into issues about what divides us. But we certainly can't get to a place of shared value in higher education through the hermeneutics of suspicion. And yet at the same time, we have to dwell in the world of facts. We have to say that we stand against moral relativism. So we do very much need a great compromise, an intellectually diverse group of people who come together that want a strong, open, sustainable, open-minded educational system. So I might end by just saying, each panelist, would you tell us just one thing that gives you hope in the future of higher education? I feared such.
I'll start. Gentleman over here asked a question earlier about what we can do in higher education, how we might move things in a better direction. The truth of the matter is, things are going to move in a better direction whether anybody likes it or not. There's a massive labor shortage in the United States. It's growing. There's an even worse one in China. The name of the game is shifting in a big kind of way. So the value added of higher education is shrinking dramatically because we need people to actually do stuff. Now, we've always needed people who have college degrees to do the more advanced stuff, but we don't need as high a ratio as we've been pumping out. I remember President Obama once said that he thought everybody should get a college education. And I think anybody who was a professor at the time thought, wow, I don't know about that. That doesn't sound like a good goal to shoot for. So I think one of the things that's going to happen to higher education is it's going to suffer from this competition from the outside of higher education generally. The thing we have to resist is having that pressure on the outside produce a kind of conservative rally behind the castle walls mentality within higher education. And what I've been trying to do is to try to go to people who are leaders in higher education and say, look, this world's getting real tough for you and fast. And if you are just going to do what everybody else is doing on a sinking ship, you're going to die. So just accept the fact that you're going to probably have 25 to 30% fewer institutions of higher learning in 10 years, maybe 20 years, and understand that you need to do something that's different than the herd, because the herd's going over a cliff.
I'll say that the schools that most of us know about and hear of are educating just a small proportion of American college students. There's something like 20 million college students in the United States, and we know of schools that educate a really small proportion. So I'm optimistic that and statistics show there's a very large winnable middle, and they're just trying to have a nice life for themselves and their families. They're not trying to do cultural transformation in the way that the small elite colleges are doing. So there's lots of, I'll call them normal American families with normal American kids who just want a good education.
I think what gives me hope is just no matter what we do to them, young people are kind of wonderful. And so, I mean, we can all think of the senior in high school that's in your orbit, a daughter, a son, a nephew, a niece, a grandchild. They still are open books. I mean, they're still curious and eager to learn. And so, we can't suppress that part of human nature, and so higher education just needs to be open to that. It's the students, all of us who have taught in some format or other. When you sit around the table with those students, that's the heart of the matter, and nothing's really changed there, even though institutionally we may have lost our way.
Thank you, panelists.